This is The Second Studio, hosted by the Architecture and Design Office fame. My name is David Lee, and with me is Marina Borderonay. The two of us are partners at the office and, of course, hosts of the show. And today, it's the two of us, and we're going to talk about the fees of an architect. And the reason why we're talking about fees, a very, very exciting subject, is that for clients who are about to embark on the design and construction process, this whole thing, it's confusing. Because both sides of it, the architecture, the design, and the construction are done in many different ways, and this applies also to an architect's fees. So you'll find fees range in their total amount, and the fee structures themselves are done in about 3 different ways, and then even more than that if we get into the details. So it can be confusing at the very beginning when you're trying to ask yourself, how much should I be paying an architect to do this service for me? What's a reasonable total amount? And what kind of fee structure can I expect? And what you can expect is all over the map, but we're going to talk about the different fee structures and at the end, roughly, vaguely, generally, how much an architect costs for different types of projects. And that'll provide some kind of context for folks listening so they understand at least where up and down is, where is the baseline, where is above and where is low.
Yeah, and that's for the United States. Like, we don't really know in other countries.
Yes. Of course, this comes from our experience in the United States, working in the major cities of New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. So if you're not in those regions and in the United States, then I don't know what the fees are like in China, for example. I couldn't say. Yeah. But I'm going to hazard a guess that is actually, if you took the amount of services and you and that was the same amount of services between one country and another, probably pretty close.
I have no idea. I would not be able to say.
I would be able to hazard some pretty good guesses based on some other secret information that I have. All right, sponsors.
Designers and architects, if you're looking for a powerful and real-time visualization and VR tool, then check out Enscape. Why is Enscape special? Well, it's super easy to use because it's a plugin and not a standalone application, which means you can work directly in your SketchUp, Rhino, ArchiCAD, Vectorworks, or Revit model. It only takes a couple clicks from installation to creating your first rendering. Enscape does realistic renderings, 360-degree panoramas and videos, and virtual reality environment. We use Enscape and we think you will love it too, so click the Enscape 3D link in our show notes to learn more.
I used to start remodeling projects with hours of tedious measuring and recreating the existing conditions. Then I discovered Canvas, an iPad and iPhone app that lets me easily scan entire homes in minutes and automatically generates editable models in formats like SketchUp, ArchiCAD, Vectorworks, Revit, and more in as little as 1 day. Thanks to Canvas, I spend more time designing the future instead of measuring the past. Get to the design phase faster with Canvas. Visit canvas.io/SSP or click the link in our show notes to schedule your demo and get your first as-built free. This is The Second Studio with myself and Marina. Here we go. Let's first discuss the different types of fee structures, which is the different ways that an architect would bill their client.
So the 3 types of fee structure that you could commonly find when you reach out to an architect for a project is the first one, percentage, also called percentage of construction cost, is the number one. The second one is the fixed fee, or so-called a lump sum, which is pretty obvious. The third one is hourly. As it implies, it's per the hour. And there is a fourth one, which sometimes you can see is a combination of, let's say, a fixed fee, an hourly or percentage, and a fixed. And we can dive into like why this hybrid fee structure could happen.
Yeah, so with the first model, the percentage of construction costs, what that means is that you are paying the architects based on a percentage of the total construction cost of the project.
Right.
The construction cost means the amount of money it takes to buy the materials, the labor, and also the amount of money you're paying the contractor for their overhead and profit, right? So, because you need the contractor to build the project. So all that together is considered the construction cost, and the architect's fee, again, is a percentage of that amount. So what that means is, in a project, the construction costs will sway. It'll go up and down depending on the phases, and usually by the end it goes higher than what people thought. That means the architect's fee, the total raw number in the end, will go up and down with the construction costs because it's a percentage of it.
And clients might be wondering, like, how do I know what my construction cost is before I know what my project is?
So this is a whole nother conversation. This is a good example of the chicken or the egg case where it's hard to know. And at the beginning, the contractors don't want to give a number because they need to know the design. The architect will say, I can't design something unless I know roughly how much money I have to spend. And the client's going to say, I don't know how much I can spend because I have no idea what I get for $2 million, for $3 million, for $1 million, for 500,000. I have no idea. So the very first dance moves that take place, it's tough and it depends on who you're working with. But there should be some conversations as early as possible about the projected construction cost or the total project budget you have as a client, and then work backwards.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, if you don't necessarily know what the project is going to be, you probably have an idea of how much money you have to spend on the project. And that usually guides the construction cost and everybody's fee.
Yes.
And somewhat what is possible to be done for this project.
Yeah. So this also reminds me that it's hard to get started as a client into a project because before you sign contracts, before you commit, you want to have as much information as you can get. You want to know stuff. You want to know roughly how much is it going to cost, how long it's going to take. You want to know all these things. But because of the nature of designing a new project, a new house, a new building, these are all really kind of unknowns.
Yeah.
So this is a different subject, but in a sense, if I'm a client, if I were talking to clients, I'd recommend you have to just start somewhere, just start. And then that picture, instead of being a guessing game, will become clearer within the first, hopefully a few weeks or a month, and then you can make a more informed decision at that point. But so there should be a pretty good idea of the desired construction costs from the outset as early as possible.
So what is what is the pros of going in the route of a fee structure that is percentage of construction costs?
The thing is, these projects, they vary in complexity and how long they take and how much they cost. Mm-hmm. So if, let's say we're talking about a 6,000 square foot house, here's one 6,000 square foot house and here's another 6,000 square foot house. Both are in the same region, there's both 2 stories. They're both 6,000 square feet. They both have the same number of bedrooms and bathrooms and same program. They both have a pool, all that stuff. One could cost a quarter of the other one. One could take a quarter of the time compared to the other one. And so that's why it's really hard to know at the outset. So the benefit of the percentage of construction costs is that it moves as the project becomes more complex. So generally speaking, the idea is that when projects become more complex, they cost more money to build,
right?
Because the details are more complex. So if we think about a truly custom house that has custom details, that has steel in it, it has a lot of technical kind of corners that need to be resolved in the design and the construction, that all adds time and increase the construction cost. Because now to solve this one detail, it's not just throw it together. Now we have 3 experts, the fabricator, the contractor, the architect, someone else, the engineer. Everyone's collaborating to solve this one thing for a custom project, right?
Yeah.
So that increases the construction cost. And as an architect, I'm okay with that detail taking a lot more of my time because my fee structure is increasing the more complex this detail becomes, the more complex the entire house, right, the entire building becomes. I will say that the percentage of construction cost fee structure has become far less common in the last, 15 years or so. It used to be much, much more common, and now it's kind of faded away. And I have guesses as to why, but it's faded away.
But so it's interesting, right? The fee of the architect kind of like moves proportionally to how much money and therefore time and effort is being put into the construction, which seems to make sense. But I feel like the cons is that the client could think that, well, there's kind of a conflict of interest because you could always design things to make it more complicated, therefore cost more money, therefore you make more money.
That's the biggest flaw and issue with this fee structure is the conflict of interest that's created, or the sensation that there is a conflict of interest. This also is where it gets kind of difficult to form contracts around this. So sometimes, like if there's a kitchen that's being designed, right? And we're specifying the materials of the kitchen. A kitchen countertop that's made of Caesar stone is one price point. A kitchen countertop that's made of some ultra cheap quartz is maybe a lower price point. The kitchen countertop that's made from imported, very rare marble from Italy that's going to be covered with an epoxy to seal it, that's a very different price point from those other two. But the amount of work, in theory, that it takes us to draw that kitchen slab is identical. Roughly the amount of work to install it is about identical, right? Obviously, when you have custom materials, maybe searching for it takes longer. Maybe installation, you want better people to install it, right? So that it costs a little bit more, but it's still roughly the same amount of labor and design work. Yet, as an architect, I get to make 3x, 4x, 5x the amount if we talk about that one slab, because this client's paying, $15,000 for an imported marble slab versus whatever it would be for Caesar stone. How is that fair to me as a client? And in a way, it's not fair. So that's where things start to fall apart. But that's also where, for some architects and designers, they'll say, I'm a percentage of the construction cost, but it's kind of capped. So for X things, if we exceed a construction cost for this thing, I don't make more money on it because it's no more additional work for me. The same thing with specifying materials is the big one. Like the first thing that comes to mind is tile. Like we know that tile can be $2 a square foot. It can be like $20 a square foot for handmade tile, right? And so that's like a fairer way to do it. Is to be a percentage of construction costs, but limit it, to a reasonable material cost. But that gets like really, really tricky to do. And if you imagine that conversation for an entire
no, you can't do that
project, it gets crazy.
Yeah.
So you will see that, like what I've described, sometimes clients, but only usually if you're working in a much more narrow scope because it's controllable. You can't do what I said applied over the course of 6,000, 7,000, 10,000, whatever square feet.
Yeah, the other thing I think that's hard to have control over, especially for the architect, is that the architect doesn't control the price of construction.
Yeah.
Or what is market rate, or what is, way above or way below. I mean, we have a sense, but we have no control over those costs because we're not the one controlling how the money is being spent.
First of all.
The market, but also how the money is spent in construction.
Yeah.
Like if, I don't know, the contractor decides to be super inefficient with one thing and spend like twice as much as it should have been, or the opposite, to be like cutting corners and being really cheap, then that also impacts us in a way that we have no control over.
Yeah.
Or if they decide to use their brother because their brother loves installing tile on the weekend.
So that's a good point. So one of the things, so we've experienced all of the things we've talked about today. So this is not made up information. So one of the things that we've always done in the contracts when it's a percentage of construction cost is there's a line in there, a clause that says that it's to be based on the market rate construction costs.
Yeah.
Now, that in theory makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So we avoid this whole thing of, the cousin's boyfriend doing the installation, and then therefore, as a client, I get to save costs everywhere. But in reality, in practice, that's hard to do because if you're a client and you do happen to have a contact who, let's say they are a very good contractor, unlikely, but they are, and that's great for you. How are you now going to determine this market rate of construction cost for the sake of this architect and their fee? It's a weird and difficult thing to overcome. So,
and then the architect has to, see the receipts, see how much money has been spent and how much should have been spent. Then you start playing accountant just to figure out like how much is owed to you, which is not what you want to be doing.
That's the other potential challenge with this fee structure is that the architect and contractor have to be in conversations with each other, and the contractor has to be very good at and organized with their billing and keeping track of how much everything costs. And not all contractors, unfortunately, do that. So there's a little bit more coordination, I guess you could say, between the architect and contractor that's required with this. Now, the other benefit of this fee structure, though, is that it's very clean, right? It's very clear. It's a number that's based on the construction costs. Did the house end up costing X amount of money? Okay, then the fee is a percentage of that amount of money. And there's no debating it. It's math, right? It's kind of self-defined. And I suppose people would be wondering, well, what would be a percentage of construction costs I can expect? which we can talk about more at the end, but I'll say it here now. For residential work, for single family houses, it's all over the map. But let's say we're talking about a custom house. I don't mean custom as in really, really high end, but a custom house that's for an end user compared to a cheap developer spec house. That's a completely different category, and we're not talking about that stuff. We're talking about houses that are designed and built for people. Somewhere between 10 and 20% of the construction cost is the architect's fee. Now, that's a huge sway, 10 to 20, but it'll be within that bracket, and later on in the recording, we'll talk about why it's that.
Is there anything more that clients should know about percentage of construction cost as a fee structure?
I mean, I think the main negative for clients is that they feel like there's a conflict of interest. And in a way there is, like I described. But also for the most part, if I were a client, I wouldn't worry about that so much and let that deter me from working with an architect. If I'm comparing different architects or debating between one versus the other. I mean, I haven't really come across many architects who intentionally inflate or increase the cost of a project or specify nice things as a way to make more money. It's just not really.
I mean, we don't have time to think about these types of like strategies.
It's not. Yeah, I think that's true. It's sort of like there's so many things to think about, and architects in general are driven by not that. Like no one, I've said it before, no one gets into architecture to become ultra wealthy. So like, and yeah, in the end, we would make more money, but it's not gonna be, so much more that. It's like I'm making a risky investment versus a non-risky investment. As it's not like we're gambling to make more money. So, even though there's that's why I said sensation of conflict of interest. It's kind of like, if the project construction cost increases 3x and it's the same amount of work for the architect, right? Even though it's now cost 3x, then yes, but that,
look, if your wife is working at selling expensive windows and every single project you're trying to put these windows in the project, then there is a conflict of interest. But other than that, it doesn't really work that way. Especially also when we consider the tiers of construction costs anyway. So like I said, that 6,000 square foot house, let's say there's one tier that's at, I don't know, quick math, like $3 million to do that versus $6 million versus $12 million, right? Those are like three different brackets. And if you're a client, you're going to fall into one of those three brackets from the get-go, regardless of who you're working with. And within those tiers, right, the fluctuation of construction costs with the architecture paired with, which will be in that tier also, is not really going to be enough to where I would not let that, again, deter you from working with someone because of that fee structure. Yeah. But it has become far less common in the last 15 years or so. Yeah. So the next one is fixed fee or lump sum. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one that's oftentimes the most exciting to a lot of people because from the beginning the price tag of the project. Probably how much roughly it's going to cost you, and how much your architect is going to cost you from the beginning, which is good if you're, let's say, you have a budget you can exceed, and you're trying to cap things and have as much control as you can. That being said, though, I think it's important to explain that a fixed fee doesn't necessarily mean that it includes everything. And that's where it gets a little tricky because I'm already thinking I don't know, I'm a client, I'm looking to hire an architect, I'm talking to three of them and they each have a different fee structure, and one has fixed and it's a low number and it sounds really appealing. I would say you kind of have to understand, and for any of this fee structure, you kind of have to understand what is included in those fee structures as part of scope and services, right? Yeah. Because a lump sum doesn't mean you get everything. There is also what's called additional services that are not part of that fixed number. Yep. That could be tagged along, on top of that number. And that is something you have to understand, depending on what they are. If construction drawings are additional services, that's a big chunk that's being ignored, and that would drastically change what that number looks like. Yeah. So one of the key takeaways from this recording for any client, when you are about to hire an architect, you must know the services they're providing and you must know the quality of those services. Now, in most other situations where you are hiring a service professional or hiring somebody for something,
A lot of people don't go quite into that far level of detail that I've just described, but you have to know it if you're working with an architect, because this project could cost millions of dollars. It's going to take years of time. It's a huge commitment. You want to spend the couple weeks, whatever amount of time it takes, to do that little bit of research to find out what services they're offering and the quality of the services. So when we talk about comparing architects' fees, structures, but also the total fees from one architect to another, the vast majority of the time, the reason why a fee will be significantly higher or lower than another is because there's a quantifiable difference in the fee and the services they offer and the quality of those services. Yeah. It's not because someone's just cheaper to be cheaper and someone's more expensive to be more expensive, or not even necessarily that someone's like way more talented than another person or another person's less talented. It's to do with quantifiably their services. And it's so critical, especially when we talk about the fixed fee model. So when you have a gap between the amount of work the architect is doing and what you're paying them, which is any fee structure that's not time and materials or hourly, then you really have to know their services.
Yeah, and we've seen that firsthand where clients get seduced by a low number and they're thinking, I'm going to be able to save money on the project on my architect by going with this guy, which, by the way, if you're trying to save money on your project, this is not on your professionals. No. Like save on maybe to be more efficient with the type of installation you're putting in and the type of foundation and maybe what tile you're putting in your pet's bathroom or whatever, but
have a smarter design.
Maybe don't overbuild a house if you don't need that many square feet. There is other strategies to save money that is not on your professional. Would you go with a cheaper surgeon if you need an important surgery? Probably not. And that's something we've seen kind of firsthand. Now,
I was going to ask you, so what are some of the services and the quality of the services that are things clients should look out for when we're talking about fixed fees and this concern of things missing? What are some of the common ones?
Yeah, and I think that ties back to the different phases of a project. Yeah. And that's something that clients are not necessarily aware of, especially if it's their first project. And I think we have a recording about the different phases that kind of explain what happens in each of these big chapters of a project. A lot of the time you would see, let's say, a low fixed fee for a project because basically the architect goes up to maybe permit drawings and there is kind of a big rough sketch of what the project is going to be, and then they drop the ball, right? So you're basically just paying for the first couple of phases.
Yeah, about 60%, maybe 50%. Yeah.
Well, at best, depending on the quality of the permit drawings. Yeah, but we've seen permit set that are 10 pages and there is four lines on them. And there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. So understanding how far are you getting in what they're providing you, and is that information enough for the next guy, meaning the contractor, to take that and start building? Yeah, because that's where the big gap is, right? If you have a set of 10 pages with 4 lines on it, how is the guy in the field going to know what to do?
Yeah, this is where it's so difficult. And so the common phases, I would say, are construction documents, that and then construction administration. Those are the two that most easily either get kicked out or lessened in quality. So construction administration, again, it's the architects being involved during construction to oversee the contractor for design conformance, more or less. That is very often kind of kicked out. So if someone's 30% cheaper than another architect, hey, the other guy, you're telling me they're 30% more than the other architect. First question, are they doing CA? Are they doing construction administration? What's that? Well, that's why we're 30% more there, right? You're 50% more than the other architect. Okay. Are they doing CDs? Yes. The construction documents, yes, they are. Have you seen their CDs? No. Get an example of their CDs. Okay, these are not construction documents they're lying to. These are just permit drawings. And permit drawings are, again, 1/10, 1/20th of the amount of drawings as construction documents. We do CDs and we do CA. That's why we're 50% more. Now, clients also might be thinking, well, if so many architects out there, and I won't say it's the majority, but enough architects out there are doing really poor quality construction documents or not doing them at all, and they're not really doing CA, then do I need it, right? Yeah. Why would I pay 50% more, another 200, 300, whatever, hundreds of thousands of dollars more to this architect, to you guys, when there's all these people who say that they don't need to do it? it's one of those things where my best advice would be to talk to a client who's gone through that process without CDs and without CA and ask them how it went.
Well,
it did not go well.
The thing is that the project is incomplete. Like the puzzle is the picture of the puzzle is incomplete. So
Correct.
somebody's going to have to come up with the information that is missing. And it's either the contractor is going to make decisions for you, or you're going to have to be the one to be on call all day to answer questions because the information doesn't exist anymore. Yeah. So I think that's dangerous. The other thing that we see too, when clients are comparing the fee of different architects, if it's fixed, for example, is, if they do interiors or not.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one.
If you want to be fair, again, you compare apples to apples. There is architects that, let's say, would never draw a kitchen or a kitchen elevation or a floor plan showing you like where the partitions are, which always puzzles me. But they just look at the exterior, and the interior is just, it's up to you.
Yeah.
Well, that's fine. If that's how they run their business, that's up to them.
Yeah.
But you have to understand that the number that they're showing you is low because that chunk of the puzzle is missing.
There would almost need to be, and maybe someone should create it, a massive Excel sheet of all the things an architect could offer as a service.
Like a menu.
For each a menu.
Yeah.
Punch in yes, no, or maybe 1 to 10, how much do you actually do it? And then that spits out a percentage of the total work, and then you can compare apples to apples.
Yeah.
But, in our case, we do like the whole thing because it's the right way to do it. And so, yeah, a lot of times people are like, well, I don't understand. Why are you double the price or whatever? And it's like, well, we're doing CA, we're doing CDs, we're doing the interiors. That's probably worth more than double, to be honest. Here's an example. Let's say you look at just a kitchen, right? One professional can say, yeah, I'll design the kitchen. Okay. Another person says, I'll design the kitchen too. Could be completely different deliverables, different services. Yeah. Designing a kitchen, what does that mean? It could mean that you draw a floor plan, just a simple floor plan, a layout, not details, just a layout, and then the main elevations of like, here's your cabinetry, and yes, the appliances will go here and there. That's considered design. On the other hand, you could do the layout, you could do all the millwork details, you could do all the material specifications, you could do the details of how materials meet each other, hardware specifications, plumbing specifications, you could do all of that. That's a lot more, and you could do renderings of those things, right? And you could go and source material samples, go with the client to view plumbing hardware together, or plumbing fixtures together. You could also be coordinating the architectural recess lighting and specifying the chandelier or the pendants above the kitchen island. You could be specifying the stools, which gets outside of architecture sort of, but you could be doing that as well. Those are completely 110% different things if you compare designing a kitchen versus designing a kitchen. And that's just a kitchen. But that same disparity and the difference in services applies to the entire project. So that's why I sympathize for clients. It's tough, because you have someone who does construction documents. I design kitchens, I design interiors, I do CA. But do you?
Yeah, and it gets hard too when, clients get referred to an architect or contractor by their friend, their neighbor, and these people have gone this route and have done things this way, and they don't necessarily know there is other ways to do things, and kind of have to explain that. Yeah. But that's kind of the things to watch out. That being said, usually, even if it's a lump sum or a fixed number, architects still use the percentage of construction costs as a reference to establish what that fixed number is going to be. It's not like, if they have, 50 years of experience and they only do that type of house, that size of house, the same design, they probably have a fixed number that's pretty nailed down, but who does that? So they usually use the percentage of construction costs as a way to estimate their fee, and kind of cross-reference with other ways to estimate their time too.
So here's some kind of behind the magic curtain, behind the scenes of what happens in most architecture offices when fees are being discussed. The fees, when they're calculated, especially if it's a fixed fee, there's a lot of time and hours spent trying to figure out what makes sense for the project. And in some offices, the fixed fee is calculated on a set not equation, a set, not an algorithm, a set equation of its cost per square foot, for new houses, cost per square foot for new houses on hills, cost per square foot for remodels. Something kind of clear, like a menu. and you punch in the square footage and it gives us the outcome, and that's okay. That's the number I'm billing you client because that's what we charge. That's a good way of doing it. But a lot of times also, and anyone who has their own business has to figure out fees knows this. You think about it, of course, from every different angle. And that also means that even though more publicly speaking, that an architect's fees are often talked about as a percentage of the construction costs, even if they don't actually bill that way. Because again, we have that 6,000 square foot house that could cost $3 million, $6 million, $12 million. How do you estimate an architect's fee in casual conversation? You do it as a percentage of construction costs because, again, it scales with the project and with the level of construction, the level of money being spent. It goes with it. That's why it's talked about. So sometimes I hear clients and they'll say, well, this architect's saying that they're going to be, 13% of the construction costs. I don't like the idea of their fee being tied to the construction costs. And I'll ask them, because it's not common these days for that to happen. I say, but is their fee actually calculated their actual fee based on the construction cost, or are they just telling you that as a way to estimate their fee?
Yeah.
Just know it's common for people to talk about the fees as a percentage, even if they don't actually bill it that way. Now, I want to go back to an earlier point you brought up with fixed fees, then the benefits of fixed fees. There's a psychological benefit for clients, depending on who you are as a person and as a client. It's nice knowing how much you're paying, and that's it. You don't have to think about that number again. Once you've said to yourself, I'm okay with that number because I've signed the agreement and we're moving forward, I don't ever have to think about it again. That is a beautiful thing. It reduces, for most people, the stress.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about the architect and what they're doing. As long as they deliver, you don't care. And that's also greatly beneficial from the architect's perspective, frankly, because there's no worrying about what did you do, why did you do this? It's like you're paying me for the outcome. I will give you the outcome by the deadline. Doesn't matter what happens between here and there.
It allows the architect to be free and therefore maybe more efficient at times, and maybe being able to take a bit more time on things that they need more time.
Yeah.
Without having to justify how much time it took for those things to happen.
Yes. And the reason why I said that it depends on who you are as a client is that some people don't like that, right? Me personally, it depends on the situation. I kind of don't, when I'm the client for things, the fixed fee makes me nervous because I always feel like I'm it's not that I'm overpaying. I don't care about paying someone a little bit more if they're good. I'm more concerned that I'm going to be taking advantage of them. I'm always worried, because I've been on the other side of it too. I'm always worried that they're going to feel when they're working like, I'm putting in way more time than I thought this was going to take, or they're asking for too many revisions or whatever it is, right? And I don't like, this is just me, I don't like knowing that there's a possibility the person I'm working with is feeling like they're not being taken care of because they have a fixed fee model. Any service professional will tell you fixed fee can be great, but a lot of times it can be horrible if you don't get it right. And it's also a challenge because potentially we've never worked with each other. I don't know how this process is going to go. You could be an easy client, you could be a tough client. So when I'm on the client side, I tend, and this is, I don't think this is common. I tend to prefer arrangements that are more flexible because I feel like I'm being respectful of them, of the person I'm working with. And I know for sure that I'm not creating a discomfort for them.
Yeah, and to me, I don't know if to me the fixed model is maybe too transactional in a way, and it's like if I was a client, maybe I wouldn't feel like I'm being as taken care of as if it wasn't a fixed fee, because it's kind of like, okay, we made a deal, we agree that we'll do that, for this price, and I just feel like there is not a lot of wiggle room for things to change or evolve. I think it's on the architect side, it's probably let's be as efficient as possible, and in some ways, let's try and spend as less time as we can just to try and make more profit. Right? You could think about it that way. So therefore, are you getting the best from an architect if you negotiate a fixed fee? I mean, if it's a fixed fee that's high and they're very happy about it, then maybe. But if it's a fixed fee that is more on the lower end, probably not.
Yeah.
And
if it's on the low end, for sure not, because then it's just pure efficiency. We got to get this done.
Yeah, and we see a lot of fixed fee structures on projects that, let's say, are like developer driven, because those are numbers that are being controlled on the project in order to make a profit and make sense.
Yeah.
So that happens then. Or like projects where maybe the scope is small and things are very well defined. So there is no reason to, go outside of the box.
Yeah.
But if you were to do like, your dream house and want the best piece of architecture ever done, I don't know that could be done on a fixed fee.
This highlights two things. I think first, something we'll talk about later on in the conversation, which is the limitations of these fee structures as a way to determine what architect to work with and what that working relationship is going to be like. If the motivations of the architect are pure, then they're pure. It doesn't matter what the model is. If they're not, then the model of the fee does make a difference. Like for us and for many other colleagues we know, at the end of the day, it does, how much we care about the work and the time we put into it, irrelevant. It has nothing to do with the fee structure itself, like not the fee structure, right? I'm not going to work less hard because it's hourly or it's fixed or percentage or whatever else. The other thing too is the fixed fee architecture contract will tend to be much longer than a contract that's based on time and materials or an hourly, because the architect has to outline very specifically what's going to happen and the limits of what's going to happen, the limits of the number of options, let's say, and then therefore list also a bunch of additional services and say very clearly, X, Y, Z, A through Z things are not part of this fixed fee and they're going to be additional.
And that's something that clients need to consider, because if you know as a client that you're going to be demanding, like you have a really hard time in life making choices, well, most likely you're probably going to have a hard time making choices on that project, right? Mm-hmm. So if you see that you're limited to one option for design of each elements of the project, that's probably not going to work out for you, right? And if you do agree to still go with that limitation, don't be surprised, but also it's hard for the architect to be like, okay, guys, we're going to look at multiple options for this because, you want to see more, mm-hmm. but it's going to be additional service. It's going to be additional. And it's kind of hard on the architect side to, come back to a client and like, first of all, keep track of everything that's additional and then, ask for those things and mention it. And then it just kind of kills the buzz of the agreed fixed fee at the beginning, because now we're kind of like going beyond that.
It depends on the client. I mean, some folks I would categorize them as being mature, and they know, okay, we've agreed to this fixed fee. I've read the contract, or we've had a conversation about the contract. So I understand that for this project, we're going to have 3 meetings for the floor plans of the house, or 3 meetings for concept design. And that kind of, it doesn't mean necessarily 3 options. Maybe there's a 12-9 options because there's 3 meetings per option, or 6 options because there's 3 options, then 2, and then 1 in the final meeting. But I have an idea of what I'm expecting. And I know as a mature adult that if I want more options, I want to see another 6, another 10, another 12, I'll pay for it, and I have to pay for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think fixed fee it's pretty interesting, and I think it's probably more common these days than percentage of construction costs.
Way more common.
Because of the obvious reasons of, just knowing. I think a lot of clients are very much into that. And I think even for architects, also being able to predict how much money a project is going to bring for sure, mm-hmm. Is always a nice thing. Like there is this level of predictability, in advance that's comfortable. That's a comfortable idea.
I think it's comfortable for the client. For the architect, it's challenging because, let's say during the design phases, which is the least quantifiable phase and least predictable in the amount of work, right?
Right.
One client and other circumstances beyond the client also could mean that we get it in the first shot or the first 2 meetings and we're good.
It's a bit of a gamble.
Other times it takes 20. Or that's kind of extreme. Other times maybe it takes like 9, and then in some cases the clients are very indecisive. So they just love seeing options. They love being in this process and seeing more iteration. So they want like 20 options. And again, a lot of client and architect relationships are brand new, so we don't know each other. I have no idea what you're going to be like. And some clients also, they think they know what they're going to be like. And when they get into it, they change because now sometimes they're like, I really enjoy these meetings and seeing options. Let's see more options. And then the architect's like, this is getting like out of control here. So that's the limits of the fixed fee. That's also why the contract will state limits. And so my advice, I guess, for clients would be, If that's the model, you got to know exactly what you're getting and not getting.
Yeah.
And if you are going to cross that threshold into additional services, to be mature about it, right? Because there is a psychological shift. People agree to a fixed fee. They're okay with it. As soon as they're hit with an additional services bill of a small amount, they're like, why am I paying this?
Yeah.
And so that's not a fun conversation for anybody. So that has to be clear from the very beginning, and it's something I would recommend clients to be mindful of as they're going through. If you're asking for more work that's beyond that contract, you're going to have to pay more for it, and because that's the agreement that's been made.
Yeah. And now a quick break to thank the sponsors who support the second studio.
Hey architects, would you like to get your as-built faster? Of course you would. Well, IPX has you covered. IPX lets you seamlessly transform your laser scans into LOD 300 BIM and CAD files. Whether you've got your 3D scans already or you need a full laser scanning service, IPX offers instant pricing and order tracking for scan to BIM services on any project, no matter the size or complexity. Once a building scan is complete, IPX delivers detailed BIM, CAD, 360-degree virtual tours, and material takeoffs in their platform where you can view, share, export, query, and quantify areas, floors, and materials. Check out the IPX link in our show notes. The Second Studio podcast is sponsored by Autodesk. Do you know about Autodesk Forma? Available standalone or as part of their AEC Collection software bundle, it's a specialized AI-assisted 3D design tool that can transform early project planning. With Forma, you can rapidly model multiple massing options at the start of your projects and analyze the embodied carbon costs of different volumes, layouts, and material choices. You can then deepen your understanding of your sites by incorporating real-world contextual data for daylight, wind, noise, and more. Start your projects right with Autodesk Forma. Check out the link in our show notes to learn more.
If you're an interior designer, you need to check out Programma. Programma is the all-in-one project management software designed to streamline the entire design process. Its cloud-based specification schedules are always up to date, minimizing double handling. This means you can spend less time switching between tools and more time designing. Click the Programma link in our episode notes and use the code SECONDSTUDIO at checkout to save 25% on an annual subscription and enjoy exploring all of the other tools Programma offers. The third one is the hourly fee structure. And this is also a very common fee structure that we see a lot. In some ways, it might be the most fair fee structure because you're really paying for the amount of time that's been put into your project. So if your architect is faster at doing something, well, you're paying for the faster time that's being spent instead of the longest. And you know, the other way goes around. Offices usually have different hourly rates depending on either like the task that's being done, like if it's an administrative task, if it's a senior or architect on the project, or if it's a lower, draftsperson on the project. Like there's different rates because it's understood that the skills and the level of skills varies.
Sure.
So we're really trying to be as fair as possible. And that also, I think, is also fair for the client, because if, let's say, we have a client who is very decisive and they make decisions very quickly and they don't need to see, 3 options, they were convinced with that first option and that's it, then eventually that shortens the amount of time and therefore the amount of money spent on this for the project. So there is potential savings in doing hourly, and sometimes it's not throughout all of the phases because some phases and some things takes more time, but you could condense some of the work and decisions in some parts of the process.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Oftentimes the contract is also much simpler because again you get what you're paying for. Versus have to list all of the excluded items, from the fees or how fees are being calculated. It's pretty clear. This is the rate, and this is what you're going to be billed at the end of the month, right?
Yeah, and one would think, I think there's a general misunderstanding of how complex or how simple projects are, and projects are more complex than people think. And there's a lot of tasks the architect does which might fall somewhat outside of their lines of their normal services or clearly outside of those lines, but it's the area of blurriness that makes it difficult in a fixed fee model. Like if I'm an architect and I'm reviewing contractors for you or reviewing contractors and their bids, is that part of my fixed fee service? A lot of times that's not part of the fixed fee because we don't know how long that's going to take. Or I'm doing some general research on X, Y, and Z things, or something that's a bit outside of the normal zone, but would still it would be the architect who should do it because they have expertise. How is that dealt with in the fee? So the nice thing about hourly is that it's all there. Whatever we need to do, we do it. And there's no concern about is it in or is it out of our services, right? If I need to visit the site extra times because of whatever thing, if I have a contractor who needs more hand-holding because they're not as experienced, not a problem for me because I'm covered. And all these ifs, not an issue. I'll take care of it. And especially if you're working with an architect who wants to be as helpful as possible, we'll do anything. We'll do anything that makes the project better. Now, that also brings to the client a level of unpredictability because you don't know how much you're going to spend on your architect in the end because it's your increments are so small; they're by the hour, and that's probably the biggest negative at the outset for clients.
Yeah, but when you have an architect who charges hourly, they should give you a ballpark idea of how much the total fee is going to be around. And again, that goes back to using that percentage of construction cost to establish that benchmark, right? If you have an architect that you're about to hire that does not give you that, then it's completely open-ended. There is no limit, no guessing, nothing to refer to. That's probably not the safest route because that also means that they probably haven't thought about how much work that's going to take, and there is no way for you to know like where you are on that range as the process as the project proceeds, right?
Yeah.
So even if you do an hourly, your architect probably has an idea of like, okay, the range is going to be between that much and that much, and as you move along, they would keep you updated, or you can ask them, right? Like, where are we with the fee that we've spent so far compared to what you've estimated, like, and how much work we have left? Because I don't think we know any architect who just bills the hour and never looks at the bigger picture. Like, you're always very much aware of how much work is left, how much money has been spent. Are we like way out of whack? Are we like close to the end and you're actually going to be, under what we've estimated or like a little bit above?
This is also, it reminds me that most clients don't know how much time certain phases or checkpoints within the phases or tasks take. And from the outsider's perspective, it could seem crazy. Why did it take you 60 hours to resolve this one room or this detail, right? When for you to draw the entire floor plan, it only took you 20 hours. How does that make sense? And honestly, as an architect, as one of the professionals, I really hate explaining that because the amount of time that it takes to solve things is just all over the map. Sometimes things take a lot longer because it involves other professionals and there's a lot more back and forth, or the number of variables that are coming at that intersection are much higher. Or it's because now we're getting into something technical and we have to triple check everything to make sure it's right, because if we don't get this right, then they're going to make a mistake in the field. Or maybe, and sometimes in design, it's that this is a weird design problem and it just takes more time to figure out than others. There's a million reasons as to why something would take longer than what someone would think. And I think
and sometimes creativity is not on demand. Sometimes you need time to think.
Yep.
Like you wouldn't ask an artist how much time did it take you to come up with this sculpture.
It's irrelevant.
I had 200 hours of finding the concept.
Yeah. And
then 5 minutes to do a sketch, and then 300 hours of sculpting the block. So it's not a linear and necessarily sequential process either.
And sometimes that proportion of the hours like you talked about in designing something, it is maybe not on the scale of what you said, but it is 40 hours of just doodling and thinking. And if at the end of the 40 hours, you bill someone 40 hours and they're like, okay, that's like a lot of money. And what do you have to show for it? And you have a crude sketch. You're like, okay, it took you 40 hours to do this. Well, didn't take me 40 hours to physically draw that thing, but it took me 40 hours to get to a point where I have a good idea. And then after that, it takes me only an hour to do the thing because I figured it out, mentally. And sometimes it's the opposite, where it's like an hour of thinking and then the 40 hours is spent producing, more visible results. It's really all over the map. So I think hourly is less great for clients if they're the type of clients who don't trust the people they're working with.
Or if, let's say, they're used to manage people and they think that they could manage the hours of a creative, because nobody can manage the hours of a creative. You know, it's like you're trying to manage the hours of a researcher.
Yeah.
Are you going to be able to do that? I don't think so. Like, if you're looking for efficiency, especially in the design phase, design is not always efficient.
Sure.
Design could be efficient in like how it's built, you know, how it's drawn, how it's modeled, but to get to the design, it's not an efficient process. That's just part of the nature of what creation is. Yeah,
I think it comes down to trust. If you trust the people you're working with, then the fee structure doesn't matter. But in that case, you would be more likely to be a good client to work with on an hourly structure. If you're not trusting of the people you work with, then that tends to be, if you had somehow the ability to pair client personalities with fee structures, if you had that ability, then a fixed fee is probably better, because then there's less tampering.
And it's hard because, you know, even if you're not like the type who likes to like get into the weeds of stuff, right? Like, you do get billed, you do see a number of hours, you do see a price. So automatically, naturally, you're trying to understand it, right? And because people can understand numbers and hours, because it's a universal unit of measure, you think you can understand what that means.
Yeah, but you can't, because you're not the professional.
But you can't. You know, like, again, you wouldn't ask your surgeon how many hours did that surgery take. Could you have done it in 3 hours instead of 5?
Right.
Probably, but you know, you wouldn't look the way you look now.
We've actually had clients approach us and say, you know, explicitly, like, I really would prefer a fixed fee. And that tells me that they know themselves and they've worked with service professionals, and they just know that they like that better, which is a good thing. The more information I have for the client, the better. I'm like, okay, great. You know who you are and you understand your own psychology and your emotional response to that fee structure. We've had other clients who are like, I want it hourly. I do not want fixed. Which again, I think is less common, but that's also super fascinating, because that person is probably more like me in that they want what's fair. They don't want to feel like that they're overspending or underspending on that person. Now, the other danger with an hourly structure is that as the project moves forward, when more money is being spent and the project goes past its estimated total project cost, which is pretty common. Everything ends up being a bit more expensive than what people think. Then when you get down to construction documents or construction administration, there can be a tendency for clients to say, let's start to kind of cut out the architect from this part of the work, because I'm already over budget. And again, CA, construction administration, is one of those services where it's easy for people to think like, I feel like I have this little feeling that we can get by without the architect or without them visiting the site on a regular basis, because I think I trust my contractor. That little seed of an idea is in there, right? Ignore that. That's a bad idea. It's a terrible idea. But it happens. So when the pressure's on, when the most money is being spent, you've already spent a good amount of money, and you're also at the most important phase in a sense because you're finally doing it. That's also the time on an hourly model that some clients will think, let's not call the architect when we have this question. Let's not have them visit the site, so I can save myself the $500 or whatever it is compounded over, you know, the next 3 years. And that is a danger, because it is a mistake to make, for sure. Yeah.
The last one is the hybrid fee structure. And usually, this is also a fee structure that I think that is offered when everybody's trying to be fair. The most fair with pricing for both parties, like the clients and the architect. Usually, those are also offered to accommodate different fees based on different phases of the project.
Yep.
It's rare that you would have, fixed and hourly both in construction documents, because how would that even work? But you can find things where maybe like on a project you have a fixed fee for up to construction documents, and then you switch to construction administration, which is like those site visits, those emails to contractor, phone calls and sketches and communication, and that could be just hourly. So again, you just pay for the hours and the time that the architect is going to spend replying to it. That's kind of a way to, in some ways, sometimes cap the fee, control, or feel like you're still getting the services that you want, but you're controlling how much you're going to spend on those.
Are you talking about it from the perspective of the architect or the client?
The client.
Yeah, I think that's true. And it's sort of not a compromise, but it's a hybrid approach. It's like, okay, we acknowledge that this part's more quantifiable. It's a fixed fee model that gives me the assurance as a client that I know the numbers. Okay, I'm good with that. And as a client, I understand that in CA, you don't know how much time it's going to take you architect. So I'm okay with an hourly model. And the reason why construction administration is oftentimes done hourly in this hybrid approach is that it's unpredictable. The more unpredictable the amount of work it is for us, the more likely we are going to want it to be an hourly structure. And by us, I mean architects in general. Because especially if we've not worked with that contractor before, new contractor, new site, new client, new design, every design's different. We're thrown into construction that could take 2 to 3 years. That's a huge difference, 2 to 3 years, but it is 2 to 3 years. And you just don't know. It's sort of like, imagine that someone approached you and said, okay, you're going to partake in this group project. This group project is going to take you 2 years to do. You've never worked with the other 2 people, but you're going to collaborate on it. How much work is it going to take you? And you'd be like, what are the other people doing? Well, they say they're going to do this, but we don't really know. Well, then how am I going to tell you what I'm going to do? Someone's going to have to pick up the slack somewhere in any group project, right? Like you're always wondering when you start off in a group project. Now, am I the one that's going to do the fair amount of work? Never happens. Am I going to be doing the lesser amount of work? Or am I going to be the one person who takes care of all the stuff that no one else is doing and all the stuff that falls through the cracks? Now, the work relationship between an architect and a contractor is not exactly that, but the same kind of give and take exists. If I'm working with a contractor who doesn't know what they're doing, it takes us twice as much work during construction administration to partner with that contractor. If I'm working with a contractor who I've known for many years and I trust, it's so easy, and it saves me time on CA, saves me stress because I trust them, they do a good job, and it saves the client money on my CA services because I don't have to be out there twice a week hand-holding this contractor, telling them how to do stuff that's when it's their job. Yeah. So
that's another way to save money on projects is just hire a team who's been working together before.
I think that's true. The other, so talking about the phases. So design is another phase that you will commonly see being hourly, because at design, you're working with the client. Again, you have another team partner with the client. You don't know how that's going to go. So that's sometimes hourly. The permits, drawings, and permitting process is either hourly or hybrid of sorts, but there was a limit because we submit our drawings to the city. The way cities are these days, the corrections that come back could be minimal and they could be excessive. And it's not black and white. There is a code, but the code is open to interpretation. And so a lot of times the amount of revisions and the time and the fee and all the work it takes to get through and get your permit is mostly dependent on the plan checker you have and not really anything else. So again, now we're introducing a wild card, this plan checker who we don't know, or they have a reputation of being really bad or really good, right? But it's still an unknown thing. So that's why a lot of times, even in a fixed fee, it'll be, okay, here's a fixed fee. We'll do the permit drawings. This includes 2 rounds of corrections. Beyond that, it's going to be hourly, because if we get beyond that, that means that the plan checker's being difficult to work with. Construction documents are a phase that are probably the one phase of them all that are most often a fixed model in the hybrid fee structure, overall fee structure, because at that point, we know the design, right? And we know how to do a construction document set, and we know how much time it takes. It's pure technical work and it's quantifiable, and a lot of the unknowns have been already figured out. So that oftentimes is a fixed fee in a hybrid, and that's negotiated or figured out once the design is figured out or mostly figured out. Then there's a conversation with the client saying, okay, now we know the design. This is how much it's going to cost for the CDs. And of course, there's an estimate that's given at the very beginning, but that's another very common model. Hybrid models, I think they make a lot of sense, but there's also, it's depending on the project type and all these other circumstances, it can get a little bit fussy, right? Like you dice it up too much, then it feels uncomfortable to people and uncomfortable to clients. You're constantly switching back and forth between one and the other.
And also I think because of the workflow with, the softwares that are being used, for architects, the phases aren't always such clean-cut delineation between them. Like you start doing your schematic design set, you're already working toward construction documents in some way because you're laying things out to be having more information. So it's very difficult to be like, okay, now, design development is done. We're switching to CDs. Although actually that might be the easiest transition because CDs is mostly just details and like deep coordination.
Yep.
But like anything before that, it's all kind of in flux.
Yeah, I know.
And, again, you built upon the previous phase for the next one. So everything is kind of tied together. Really, like I think the easiest cut is the construction administration and all of the design phases before that, because it's clearly when the project is going from paper to dirt, to site, and the what is being provided by the architect just kind of like slightly shifts from, the computer to now like more in-person visits and communication and troubleshooting, which is a little bit of a different thing.
Yeah, I think that's true. I want to, so those are the 3 or 4 models. I'll also very, very quickly talk about interior design. Again, you'll find the same thing for interior design as one of the 3 models that I described. But in interior design, which includes merchandise and furnishing, most often the way that whole process works is that there's the selection of the items, and that might be billed in different ways. And then there's the procurement of the items, which means the interior designer is ordering it on behalf of the client and then technically selling it back to the client. And that we can get into in a different recording. But I'm just saying that when it comes to procurement, most often that service is charged as a percentage of the merchandise. So it's sort of similar to the percentage of construction costs, except in this case, there's not a construction cost, it's just the cost of the item. So if there's a sofa, the interior designer will buy it using their trade discounts, which vary from 10 to 30%, maybe 20, 15%, something around there. And then they charge the client usually 20 to 25%, let's say, maybe even 30% of the merchandise gets billed to the client. So the client is paying a percentage of that item to the interior designer for their procurement services. Now, for clients who are new to this, they might be thinking, wow, 25% of an item I'm paying for someone to do procurement services. That sounds outrageous to me. But again, what is that 25% of payment covering? Is it just procurement? Does it include staging? Does it include selection? Sometimes interior designers will do it as a percentage of merchandise for the entire services. So this goes back to like understanding exactly what you're getting. It also is because most of the time the designer, like us professionals, as designers, we should be getting a discount depending on where we're buying it from. And that discount is passed on to the client.
Yeah, that's the thing. You're actually not buying the sofa at retail price plus 25%. You're buying the sofa at a trade discount, so at a professional price.
Yeah.
So you're already buying it cheaper. You're basically oftentimes just buying at the same price you would buy it retail, but instead of you buying it retail and a professional adding their markup on top of it for their time and effort spent, or you ordering it and doing everything yourself, a portion of the price of the sofa goes to the professional, is allocated to the professional. That's why trade discount exists, is to make sure the professional who's ordering it is getting paid for the time and effort they're putting in taking care of that order.
Yeah. Yeah. So it depends on how much the professional is charging. It depends on the discount, but oftentimes you're breaking even, or you're relatively close to it, and maybe 5% different, 10% difference between like what you described. And for most clients in certain scales of project, is worth it. It's worth paying the 5% difference to have someone handle all the stuff for you.
And I think it goes back to the project budget. Like if you can only shop at retail stores that don't offer those discounts, then it probably doesn't make sense for you to pay someone 20-25% on top of that to order the stuff for you. If you're shopping and you have a higher budget and you're buying things at a much higher price point, then it makes sense because it's built in the price of the item.
This also highlights that there are the limits of the percentage of thing as a way of calculating fee, whether it be percentage of merchandise in this part of the conversation or percentage of construction costs. Like these things work generally, but only in a certain tier, or a certain range rather. So in construction cost terms, if someone's like, I'm going to build a house for $200 a square foot, and you told me your fee's 15%, can't. We're way so low on the construction cost scale. Like my fee has to be now, I don't know what, like way, like 3 times 15%. It has to be like significantly higher because we're used to doing projects that cost triple that or more than triple that, something way higher. And the same thing applies to merchandise. Like if you're going to, on the extreme, like, Pottery Barn, or I don't know who's shopping at TJ Maxx, but somewhere low, then the percentage of the merchandise doesn't make sense at all.
Yeah, no, it doesn't make sense. But then you can't be complaining about interior designers are so expensive. If you're shopping in the wrong places and you're hiring them to shop there, it doesn't make sense. So it's gonna be expensive.
I also want to talk about, I think we already did, but why are services between architects, why are fees between architects so different? And again, it's mostly just to do with the different levels of services. It also has to do with, frankly, their level of, I wouldn't say experience, but level of like notoriety, right? Like if you hire someone who's a star architect or celebrity designer person, they're going to be premium because they're a celebrity type of person.
Because they're in high demand. You just pay more for stuff that's in high demand.
True. I think more often though it comes down to the services.
If you get a quote that's really low, also tells you that maybe those are the guys on the block that nobody wants.
Yeah, it's weird. This also again gets back to the limits of using fee structures and fees as a way to like vet people.
Yeah.
But talking about the fees themselves, the total fee, I would say again in our space of like houses, 10 to 20. 20 is high end. You're paying a lot of money. You're paying significantly above average for an architect. And hopefully you're talking to the right people. You're not just being ripped off. 10% is kind of like the baseline. It also depends on the scale of the project and the architect, of course. But let's say we take, the mid-bracket, high mid-bracket of architects. If they're doing a 10,000 square foot house, their fee will probably be a lower percentage compared to if they were asked to do a 2,000 square foot house, right? That makes sense. There's an economy of scale that kind of comes into play with projects for sure.
And it also depends, again, if they are providing interior design services, interior architecture or not.
Yep. All of those things can make it sway significantly from one end to the other for sure. One of the last things is, we've talked a lot about these fees, the fee structures, and how they relate to phases. And I want to provide a general understanding to people of how much work takes place during each of the phases, roughly speaking. This will vary depending on the situation, the project, and the client, or the architect and all that stuff, but roughly speaking. So if we roughly say that there's schematic design as the first chunk and maybe concept designs rolled in there, then you have design development as the next phase. Then you have construction documents and CA. And somewhere there you have permitting. But let's just keep it simple to 4 chunks. Schematic design, design development, construction documents, construction administration. Roughly how much work does an architect have to do during each of these phases to complete the project? Roughly speaking, it's about 23% for the first piece, 23% for design development, the second piece. Let's say 33% for construction documents, so it's more than the previous phases, and about 23% for CA. Now, if you add those up, that's 102%. But I did that just so it's 23, 33, 23. And that's roughly what it is. Some architects, their concept design, schematic design phase, instead of it being 23%, it'll be a little bit lower. Sometimes it might be a little bit higher if they really prioritize that. And so it'll shift, roughly, but that's kind of what we're looking at, roughly that amount. And that oftentimes, therefore, translates to how much of the fee you as a client are paying. If you're working on in an hourly structure, how much takes place during each of those phases.
Yeah, and this can change too, if the project is fast-tracked or, stuff like that. But yeah, that's pretty accurate. So in conclusion, there is about 3 different types of fee structures that exist out there: percentage of construction costs, fixed fee or lump sum, and hourly fee. And on top of that, you could imagine a hybrid fee structure. I think the most important thing to understand is, again, what are each of these structures including and not including?
Yeah, I think so. And also, again, there's limits to the fee structures and even the fees themselves. So I think the value of this recording is for people to have some knowledge and some background and context so they feel more comfortable when they're engaging in conversations with professionals. But you always want to hire the professional that's the best fit for you and the one who's qualified, more so than any of the stuff we've talked about. So if you're talking to one architect and they have a different fee structure than the other one, but you like them, but you don't like their fee structure, then just tell them. Or just deal with it and go with the one that you like as a person who you trust. That's the most important thing always. That trumps everything else. It trumps the fee amount to a degree. It trumps the fee structure. It trumps where they're located. It trumps a lot of stuff, right? And so it's a mistake for a client to look at one architect and another and say, well, there's a 2% difference in fees, but I like the more expensive one better. Go with the one that's 2% more. You don't want to roll that dice on a project that is going to be this close of a relationship over the course of years.
The last thing too is that a lot of, like as we talked about the details of all of those fee structures, is that in the end they should all end up being the same, right?
Yeah, it kind of works out that way.
I mean, like the fixed fee and the hourly is still based on an estimated percentage of construction cost. Percentage of construction cost is what it is. So, and as offices put together proposals and things, like they're always looking at it from those 3 points of view to make sure that what they're estimating also makes sense. So I don't think people should necessarily stop considering an office because, it's like hourly and not fixed. Therefore, that's a big no-no. And if it's a concern, then voice it to the office you're considering. There might be ways that, a hybrid fee could come to play.
Yeah.
Or you actually understand what is being estimated in this hourly fee and what is that bracket compared to the fixed number. Like, I don't think you should reject a proposal based on the fee structure necessarily.
Yeah, no, I agree. And there's ways to work around it. Like, in fact, I was just thinking about the percentage of construction costs. I was speaking with an architect colleague of mine, and that's how he works. So if the project scales up, then he gets paid more. And the same thing with a fee based on square footage. If the project grows by double the size, then my fee doubles, kind of deal.
But it's the same.
But there's also
all of the fees.
But there's also a threshold at the bottom, right? So if the construction cost gets too low, then he states to the client, "I have a minimum base fee to do this work. Like I need to get paid this much money to do the project, period, regardless of your construction cost. So that's my starting fee." And then once we get to a certain construction cost point, then it transitions to being a percentage of construction costs. Now we could debate on whether or not that works or doesn't work and all that kind of stuff, but there are ways to make it work for sure.
But like if the project grows, if it's a percentage of construction cost fee structure, people say, oh, if the project grows, then we also our fee grows. But it works for the same for the other 2 fees. Like if the project grows in an hourly, you have more hours of work that, you're being paid for your services. If the project grows and it's a fixed fee, well, it was established in the fixed fee contract what the scope was. If it goes outside of the scope, there's an addendum to the contract. Therefore, there's an addendum to the fixed fee. Yeah. So in any case, it fluctuates.
And I think you were right. If we were comparing apples to apples, meaning to say we're talking about a project that stays roughly in the mid-tier of process. So we're not significantly cutting it in half, or we're not significantly blowing it up and tripling it in size, or we're spending, 2x the amount of time in the design iterations and twice the number of design options. Let's say we're staying in kind of the normal zone, right? It's kind of a funny thing in the end. If you look at the 3 models that we're talking about, they all end up being roughly the same amount of money. And it also kind of at some point gets to the market rate of an architect in your region and for the type of project you're doing. getting rid of the top 1%, the bottom 1%, top 10%, and bottom 10%, everyone in that tier is going to be close to being the same, because it just works out that way. Like the amount of work it takes to do apples to apples services, you know, it's about the same.
Yeah.
So from that, I guess one thought is it sort of comes down to personal preference for the people involved, for the architect and also for the client. You know, like I said, it's not like other services or other professions. I'm trying to think of an example where you're going to go to this one person and they're going to be $1,000 an hour because they're like this magic guru and they're going to solve the universe in X, you know, period of time or whatever. It's not really the case. Like the amount of work it takes to do a project is roughly the same amount of work it takes to do a project legitimately.
Yeah.
So anyway, I hope this recording was helpful. If you have questions about any of this stuff, then feel free to reach out to us. You can find us through The Office, which is Fame, and we have an Instagram and a website, and we're everywhere. You can also find the podcast, which is on Instagram, and it's Second Studio Pod. There's a website, Second Studio Pod. There's a hotline, which is 213-222-6950, so you can call and leave a voicemail or text it. And if you have any questions about fee structures, pros and cons, call us. Let us know. I mean, I'm open to talk with people. So I've spoken with people before and listeners who were actually in the process of hiring an architect, and they're like, "Hey, I've never done this before. Can you talk to me about like this is what I'm considering? These are the people. These are their websites. Like, just what do you think?" And I'm more than willing to play owner's rep for a little bit and have a conversation
and
with
for
them.
free.
And for, I mean, like whatever. It's a conversation, and I
right.
want people to know what feels right to them.
Yeah.
Anything else to plug?
No, that's it. And we are on, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify as well. If you want to tune in and find out more of those episodes, we have a lot more of those very helpful kind of like tips within the profession for people looking to work with architects. So make sure you check out that series. And that's it. A lot more to come.
Yep. Sounds good. Talk soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.